When I was 20, I was hospitalized due to immunodeficiency for multiple infections, including one that had to be surgically removed. A lot of crazy things happened during that visit, including being misdiagnosed with AIDS and flesh-eating bacteria, and this was at one of the best hospitals in the United States. But this was by far the scariest thing that happened during my stay. One night around 3 a.m., one of the nurses came in. I woke up because I had slept a lot that day, and the bright lights in the hall bothered me. It wasn't my usual male nurse, but an older woman, maybe in her mid to late 40s. I had never seen her before and she looked very severe. She didn't acknowledge me at all when I greeted her or asked questions. She finally said something like, "Time for your medication." I tried to respect that she didn't want to talk and just faced forward again, partly because it hurt to move, but I noticed that she had a much larger syringe than usual. My morphine dose was normally given in a 10 to 20 cubic centimeter syringe, but this one was huge, like 100 to 500 cubic centimeters, and the accuracy couldn't be that good. I turned my head again and asked, trying to sound friendly and interested, what my dosage was and if she was sure she had the right person. She ignored me. I continued, "Because I think maybe normally my dosage is a lot lower. Would you mind double checking?" She only said, "Go to sleep, this will be over soon," injected the medication and left. I was kind of out of it. I was so used to all of this stuff going on around me that I figured I was mistaken. I tried to go back to sleep, but even before the medication hit me, I felt like something was wrong. I thought about kinking the IV line, which would trigger an alarm and force attention, but I told myself to calm down and try to sleep. After all, they do this for a living, and it was probably just the change of nurse that was bothering me. After some time, I don't know how much, I started to feel genuinely and undeniably weird. First, everything felt hot, or rather hot on the outside, like I was radiating heat from the surface of my skin, but cold on the inside. Around then, I noticed that everything had turned a shade of red, pulsing in time with what I imagined was my heartbeat. I was staring at the ceiling in the dim light, and everything I could see was through this red filter pulsing slightly. I could feel goosebumps on every inch of my body. Then I started to feel nothing. I lost all sensation in my skin. I could still feel pressure, but nothing else, except intricate ripples across my body, as though I were naked with the window open. Eventually, even these faded, but they were a good example of the mental confusion that set in. For instance, after a while I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed, or if I was actually seeing or just thinking I was seeing. When all sensation finally left me, I felt like I was floating about 5 inches off the surface of the bed. I realized as I tested my ability to sense things that I was having a hard time moving. Moving my hand or arm took a concerted effort. Somehow I managed to hit the call button, for which I was later grateful. But nothing felt emergent. The whole experience came with a warm fuzziness, so I spent a lot of time just experimenting with trying to move my hands or arms, watching them before realizing I wasn't actually looking at them, and gradually losing my ability to move anything at all. By the time I could barely move my wrists, not my arms or fingers, and my legs felt like a foreign country, I started to feel concern. I realized on a deeper level in the back of my mind that the feeling in the pit of my stomach was clenching worry. This could actually be very dangerous. I wanted to hit the button again or even call out, but I was too tired. My muscles wouldn't move, and I noticed that the pulsing wasn't as frequent as it had been. Only later did I fully realize the significance of that. I mentally slapped myself and focused consciously on breathing, in and out, in and out. and remembered not to forget the inhale. That was the hard part. It felt like the nurses never responded. I would have guessed it had been at least 22 to 35 minutes. Suddenly, as if in slow motion, a lot of things happened at once. There had been this growing tension inside me. If I could have flexed every muscle in my body, I would have. I was fighting something very hard. Then my nurse came in, my male nurse, whom I had thought was out for the night. The moment I heard the door open, it coincided with a sudden release of all the heavy pressure that had settled over me, like a soft, heavy blanket that wouldn't let me move. I suddenly sat up and projectile vomited into the bathroom, right next to the nurse who was just walking in. After that, I could move. I could even speak after a few minutes. My nurse seemed relieved, to say the least. He cleaned up and sat next to me, talking for a while. He said that another nurse had been trying to help him and had mixed up my dosage, but he didn't give many details. It wasn't until years later that I thought, this was the terminal ward. I had been out of it for days, clearly invisible pain for some of it, and I was the youngest person there by 40 years or so. I wondered if it was just a mistake, or if that woman was an angel of death. Either way, I refused morphine for the rest of my time there and have avoided it ever since. I wouldn't accept any of the other painkillers either. Let's start with a little backstory. I'm a 24-year-old female who fell in love with national parks, so much so that I decided to work full-time at one for about 3 years. This experience allowed me to meet some great people, but it also brought some sketchy individuals into my life. This particular story starts with a man we'll call Sam. Sam was a tall man with a shaved head and glasses. He was the kind of coworker who would always linger awkwardly. He made everyone feel uncomfortable, but not enough to warrant serious concern. The only issue I really noticed was that he seemed to have a drinking problem. He would show up to work still drunk and would be sent home somewhat regularly. He seemed innocent enough in a socially awkward way. I only worked with him for a few months before I was transferred to another location and offered a pay raise. A few months after starting the new position, I was in the employee break room browsing my news feed when I received 5 messages within a 3-minute time span. I didn't even realize people could type that fast. The messages were from Sam, which caught me off guard because I had never spoken to him outside of my previous position. The messages consisted of vague threats regarding my friends and myself. He seemed upset to find out that I had gay friends and thought I was tainted by association. I was less upset about his foul perception of me and more angry that he had targeted my friends who were truly lovely people. I am bad at taking the high road, so I decided to give this man a piece of my mind. We weren't friends, hardly acquaintances, so I didn't feel that his behavior was appropriate. Through our exchange, the rude context of his messages became obviously threatening. He told me that I should die along with my gay friends and that he would be more than happy to end our misery. I was shocked. His anger made no sense to me, and I realized I wasn't going to reason with this lunatic. I decided to get human resources involved. We worked for the same company, so I thought this would be the best way to prevent further harassment. HR advised me to block contact from him while they investigated, and also to alert authorities in case he acted on his threats. Authorities were involved, but didn't seem too fazed by the messages I showed them. They almost seemed annoyed that I had called them in the first place. I filled out a statement and was told to contact them if anything escalated. The next day I woke up to find trash all over my front steps. It was odd, but not too strange. I actually thought it was a raccoon since I was in a national park. Then I saw a piece of paper with the words, "Watch your back," scribbled onto it. I looked around at the other neighboring cabins but didn't see anyone. I cleaned up the mess but saved the note to show my sister who lived with me. When she got home later that morning, I caught her up on the previous night's events. She didn't even know Sam because, like I said, we weren't friends. I gave her a brief description of him in case she saw him lurking around and then headed to work. Halfway through my shift, I got a phone call from Alexa. She sounded shaken and told me that a man matching Sam's description had come to our cabin asking about me and where I was. She played dumb and pretended not to know me. After an awkward silence, he said, "I'll be back to get her later," and walked away. She said he sounded and acted as if he had been heavily drinking and had an intense coldness to him. I wasn't messing around at this point. I've watched enough crime shows to know you shouldn't underestimate people, so I called the company's security team. I asked them to check on my sister and to escort me home immediately. I was home within 20 minutes of her phone call. She gave security more information and they were able to find out which cabin he lived in. Apparently, he only lived about a 2-minute walk down our street, which was really unnerving. Park rangers were called again. They collected more statements from both of us and decided to pay him a visit. They seemed to take the situation more seriously now that he knew where I lived. They came back after talking to his roommate. It was confirmed that he lived there but hadn't been home since the night before. Authorities put a word out to keep an eye out for Sam. They offered to have a unit keep an eye on us that night, which we gladly accepted, and we went to bed. I woke up to 34 messages from an unknown number. It was Sam again. He was very angry that I involved HR and the Rangers. He said, "You're going to pay for this. You messed with the wrong person. I will end you." I emailed HR and presented screenshots of the messages. I demanded that they resolve this immediately and requested a meeting with the director to discuss termination. In national parks, when you're hired, the company provides cheap housing on site. When you're fired, you have to leave the national park boundary within 24 hours. I thought this would solve most of my issues. HR seemed to agree and tried to locate Sam for a meeting. No one had seen him since the first messages began 2 days prior, so the park was on a manhunt. The park is huge and easy to hide in if you don't want to be found. Thankfully, his roommate alerted officials when Sam stumbled home drunk the next day. Authorities were able to speak with him and sober him up enough to take him to the HR building a couple of hours later. After the meeting, I was notified that he had received a first and final write-up, but would continue to work and live on my street. He apparently gave a sob story about his personal issues and promised to leave me alone. I was baffled that, even with him threatening to kill me, they weren't going to fire him. Thankfully, the Rangers were equally surprised and still offered to provide surveillance just in case. It was quiet for 3 days. I thought it was actually over and even started to feel a little bad for Sam. I wondered if he was going through something difficult, and I was just his mental punching bag. I didn't agree with it, but I no longer felt as threatened, if that makes sense. Then I received a knock on my door and opened it to find 2 Rangers wanting to speak with me. According to the Rangers and a few people from HR, Sam's roommate had called the emergency line when Sam started acting bizarre after the meeting. He tried to convince his roommate to lure me to a secluded place so Sam could take care of me. Thankfully, his roommate wasn't a psycho, and reported the situation immediately once Sam went to the bathroom. Rangers arrived within minutes and restrained Sam to search their cabin for evidence. They found a loaded firearm and a suspected suicide note stating he planned to kill me and then himself. There was plenty of evidence for a case, and he was successfully banned from all national parks in the United States. I have since moved to a different state and changed my contact information. He has since contacted me once to brag about how much I helped him secure unemployment benefits, which I quickly shared with officials. According to officials, he is restricted to a southern Arizona county due to other crimes he later committed, and I shouldn't worry about him finding me. As for HR, the director actually had to deal with harassment from Sam after the banning and asked me to testify on her behalf if it turned into something more serious. I haven't heard anything since, so I assume she found another way to stop his assault. I don't understand why he decided to target me. We hadn't had many interactions at work. I've tried to dig through my memories to find a single time that I may have invited this kind of behavior, but I'm convinced it was due to many factors, including his instability and alcoholism. Sam, if you're still watching me, let's not meet again. Hi. My sister, my mom, and I have been trying to make sense of this for the past couple of hours, and the facts get less comforting the more we compare our experiences of that night. Last Friday night, I, a 17-year-old male, was home alone while my family, besides my sister who was 21 and was at work, stayed in their cabin a few kilometers away. I'm used to staying home alone. This scenario is very common in the summertime, especially while I'm working and can't travel back and forth from the cabin. I'm not usually jumpy or afraid when I'm home alone anymore, since I'm used to the odd creaks and settling noises of our old house. I was especially comforted by the fact that my sister's dog was also in the house with me that night. Most noises could be attributed to him, and if anything were to happen, he would act as a sort of guard dog and to alert me to anything odd. At the same time, however, he is the type of dog who barks at any noise or person walking past the door or windows, so I'm used to hearing him bark or growl at night. Even so, this past Friday, the sound of his barks at nearly midnight were disconcerting to say the least. Despite my comfort with staying home alone, I am still terrified of the idea of a break-in or any uninvited human interaction at midnight. I let him bark for a few seconds, telling myself it was just someone walking past our glass door in the adjacent alleyway, and that he would quiet down once they passed. Needless to say, that's not what happened. He kept barking and growling for too long, and I finally got out of bed. I sleep in the basement, so I walked upstairs to check it out. As I suspected, he was standing alert at the glass door. I was comforted for a moment until I walked over, ready to close the curtains and go back to sleep, and saw the door open about 2 or 3 inches. I froze. I had let Bosco the dog out earlier that night, but I know I closed the door. I have never left this door open. I am a paranoid person with bad anxiety, especially about break-ins, so I would never, while home alone, forget to close the door. I am 100% certain. At the time, I didn't let myself think about this or even acknowledge that I could not have left the door open because I knew it would send me into a spiral, possibly even an anxiety or panic attack if I didn't explain it away. I closed and locked the door, double-checking that it was certainly locked. Using the flashlight on my phone, the lights were all off. I looked around the entire second floor of our 3-floor house, including closets and other reasonable hiding spots, just to put my mind at ease. Upon finding nothing, I went back downstairs to my room. While I was down there trying to push away the fear, I could hear Bosco walking around on the floor that doubles as my bedroom's roof. I thought I was overthinking it when it started to sound like human footsteps accompanied by Bosco's footsteps. He walked around for about 10 minutes before I put in my earphones and talked myself down until I could fall asleep. At 2 a.m. that same night, my sister came home from work. I had woken up a few minutes before this to Bosco in the basement, which he never does. There's even a gate to stop him from getting to the basement, whining at my bedroom door. When I got up to let him out, my sister walked in. We let him out the front door rather than the glass patio door, letting him in the same way. We talked for a while before I went back downstairs and my sister went to the bathroom. I forgot about the door busy with work for the next few days and didn't mention it to anyone until tonight. My sister and my mom were home with me for a movie night, while my dad and brothers stayed at the cabin. I remembered the door situation when we were picking out horror movies to watch. I was sharing it as a creepy, almost funny story before my sister spoke up, saying that the same night, an hour or so after they got home, the door was open again. The same door that was locked from the inside and had not been opened since earlier that night. My stomach dropped and I started shaking as soon as this was revealed. We first tried to explain it away. Maybe she had let Bosco out and forgot to close it, but we both recalled that we had used the front door. Then we tried to justify a reason someone would break in, not steal anything, and stay for 2 hours before leaving. Ultimately, I realized that I might have locked someone in the house with me, then forced them to hide upstairs while I searched the second level of the house. Then this hypothetical person would be trapped up there knowing that the house appeared empty with all the lights off, and the dog who would bark if they revealed themselves, alerting me to their presence. Then, when I was in the basement and my sister was in the bathroom, they ran out the glass door, timed perfectly to when they found it open once more, much wider than when I found it, as though they were only in a hurry to leave. Perhaps they left it open the first time for a quick escape, or to avoid the loud sound of the door meeting the frame. Either way, it ties together too perfectly for me to reasonably dismiss. I know it's unlikely, especially with nothing missing, but in this small town there have been many reports of break-ins where nothing was stolen, only vandalism or just unauthorized entry. So it's not as unlikely as it might be in a bigger city. I can't make sense of this, and I'm shaken thinking about the possibility of someone being in my house while I was asleep alone in the basement. Part of me doesn't believe it, but I can't shake the many coincidences that make the situation so concerning. I am certainly glad that my searching came up empty that night, and that I did not meet this person face to face. The following account happened roughly 3 years ago during the summer of 2012. It has always been difficult for me to talk about, but I have found that writing about it is therapeutic. I was 17 at the time and I had just gotten my first job. I lived in rural Western Virginia in a small mountain community. My mom's friend owned a camping resort not far from my house that had a general store, and she said she'd pay me to help out in the store during the busy summer months. It was a pretty easy job, and I met a lot of out-of-towners, which was nice because our community could get so isolated. Most of us lived pretty far away from each other. One day, a big burly mountain man type came into the store. He was in his late 40s or early 50s, probably 6'5" and about 280 pounds. He looked dirty, like he worked outside a lot. His clothes were tattered and he had a long beard. We had a few woodsy hermit types in the area, and he definitely looked like one of them. He bought some basic items, including one of our homemade bars of soap. When he came to the register, he looked me up and down carefully. He didn't talk for a minute. He just stared. His people skills clearly needed work. "Did you make this soap?" he asked gruffly. "Possibly," I said. "I help out with that sometimes." "You make a lot of your own stuff." "Toiletries and things like that, yeah. I like that, he said, nodding to himself. I honestly didn't know how to respond. I quickly rang up his items and he paid with crumpled money. Right before he left, he asked, "You cook too?" "Sometimes," I replied. "Bet the boys around here are itching to marry you," he said, smiling to himself. I said nothing. I was puzzled as to what I had said that stood out as wife material. I told Krista, my mom's friend and my boss, about the bizarre encounter and she laughed it off, as did my family and friends. But then Mountain Man started turning up more often. We chatted a little bit here and there, and I found out he had a cabin in the woods, which he claimed he built with his bare hands. He said he hunted and lived off the land, other than the things he'd bought at the store. Over time, our chatter escalated, with him making comments about how nice it would be to have a woman like me around, who could make those things and cook his kills. One time he even said I had the birth and hips that men lust after. Shudder. He even started inviting me to fish with him, hunt with him, see his place, and so on. I always politely declined, but he became more insistent, and I told Krista how uncomfortable he was making me. She said that when he came in I should go get her and she would ring him up. Thanks to her, I started speaking to him less, and I thought I wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. But one night I was closing up and it was late, around 10 at night. Krista had left about an hour before, and I was leaving by myself. The only two cars in front of the store were an old blue pickup and mine. I was immediately alarmed because I knew Mountain Man drove a blue pickup, but I didn't see him in the lot, just his truck. So I walked quickly to my car and checked the back seat before starting it. When I first turned the key in the ignition, I got nothing but sputters. I tried several more times and got scared quickly. Why was this happening tonight? I asked myself angrily. Just as I reached for my phone to call for help, there was a loud pounding on the driver's side window. I was shocked that I didn't pee myself. I didn't even want to look because I knew it was him. But I did, and my suspicions were confirmed. He smiled a big grin at me, showing exactly which teeth were missing. "Need some help?" he said loudly through the window. I shook my head furiously. "My dad is on his way," I said, hoping to scare him off. I hadn't spoken to my dad in years. Mountain Man laughed. "No, he's not," he said. "Open the door." The hairs on my neck stood up straight. How did he know I was bluffing? "No," I said firmly. "Leave me alone." Suddenly, he looked angry. He pulled the handle, but I had locked all the doors when I first got in. He kept furiously pulling the handle and started pounding on the window. "Leave now or I'm calling the cops," I screamed at him. He clearly wasn't getting the message, so I pulled out my phone and called 911. I must have sounded hysterical to the dispatcher, and I knew she could hear him pounding. She said she would have officers out as soon as possible, but out here that could be a while. "The cops are on their way. Leave now," I screamed at him, but he didn't seem to be deterred. After a few more minutes of pounding, he suddenly stopped and walked back to his truck. I watched him go, hopeful he would leave me alone. But then he started walking back toward me with a crowbar in hand. I screamed, "Get the hell away from me!" He started swinging at the driver's side window with the crowbar. I ducked down into the passenger seat on the floor and covered the back of my neck like they teach you in tornado drills. I heard the sickening crack of the window, but then suddenly, I heard male voices shouting, telling him to get away. I sat up and saw two men approaching, one with a shotgun pointed at him. I recognized them as a couple of guests staying at the resort for a camping trip. I breathed a sigh of relief and got out of the car, telling them that the police were on the way. I thanked them profusely as we waited for the police. Surprisingly, Mountain Man didn't make any move to get away, and the cops arrived quickly, so he didn't have much chance. They took him away and I gave them my statement. I was pretty shaken up for a while afterward. A few weeks later, I finally got the scoop on the man. Apparently, he had a history of mental illness. He had been in and out of state institutions. He really had been living in an old cabin in the woods, where he wasn't taking his medication, and his issues were worsening. My cousin Luke is a cop, and later he told me more about the case which he had heard from other officers. The police searched the cabin after the incident to see if there was anything of interest. They found a journal that Mountain Man kept. Apparently, in it he said he was lonely and wanted a wife. He mentioned me by name a lot. Stupid name tag. And Luke said there were a lot of lewd things in there about me that he didn't want to share. He explained simply that Mountain Man had a detailed plan to abduct me, starting with sabotaging my car engine to get me into a vulnerable position. When I heard that, I nearly burst into tears thinking about how horribly that night could have gone if those two men hadn't come along. Thankfully, he has been put back into a state institution. With any luck, he'll stay there for good. Mountain Man, let's not meet again.